Sometimes when we begin to question our faith or have doubts about our tradition, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert. When we take a step back and honestly evaluate organized religion in the 21st century, many times it doesn't make any sense. The more we cling to it and try to save it, the worse it becomes. In addition, widespread abuse, cover-ups, and victim shaming cause some of us to question whether it will ever be right again.
The Desert Sanctuary was created by Karl and Laura Forehand. It consists of a podcast, a blog, along with Karl and Laura's writing.
We're happy you're here. Welcome to the show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary. We are glad that you are with us today. I'm Laura Forehand, and I'm here with Karl Forehand. And of course, we have another amazing guest that we're going to talk to today. Before I jump into the bio, what did you want to share with the listeners?
Yeah, it's the same things we talk about most of the time. The book, Out in the Desert, is still doing well after about 6 months. I think it's 6 months, whatever.
Probably.
Something like that, 5 or 6 months. It's doing well. It's just about to go off sale. By the time this airs, it'll be regular price, but still lots of conversation out there about the book. We also realized that we just have been kind of piling things out to YouTube over the last few years, and want to encourage people to subscribe to that also. Just tons of information there. I think even our guest today is one of the YouTube conversations that's out there. That's one of the things that's out there. So there's a lot of wisdom out there from a lot of my good friends. And also leading forward is going to happen, we hope, in about April. So for those that know about it, be thinking about that, and we'll be working on it from this end. We're also working on a couple more projects, right? My next novel's coming out, and then Laura and I are working on another one for the fall that we can't really talk about too much yet. So.
Yeah, not a novel, but a book.
Another part of the story, the next leg of the story, I think, is what it'll amount to. But that's not what we're here for today. We're here to talk to our guest, and Laura's going to tell you about her.
So we're excited to have Vanessa R Brooks back on the podcast. She's not been with us for a couple years, but we have not forgotten about her because of her wisdom. And she is a wife, mom, grandmother, and fur baby mom. She is a doctoral candidate, thought leader, humanitarian, and entrepreneur. Vanessa served in the public sector in the social services industry and pastor a church she founded for 14 years. She is the founder of Life After Church, a spiritual community where she provides spiritual enrichment coaching, mentorship, and leadership development for those seeking a safe community to deconstruct and transcend their religious faith. Welcome so much to the podcast. Well, I should say welcome back to the podcast, Vanessa.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me back.
Yeah.
It's a good thing when you're invited back. That's right. Because sometimes you're not always invited back. So thank y'all for allowing me to
get back. We've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. So we're glad that you're here.
Yeah. Vanessa R Brooks is we used to at funerals they used to read the what do you call it, the obituary. Mm-hmm. And then I would say, well, that's the official story, but let me tell you in my words. Mm-hmm. And so now what we want to give Vanessa a chance to do is in her own words, just to tell us a little bit about who you are, what you've been up to, kind of how you got to here and what you're doing now and things like that. And we're just going to go from there.
Who am I? I am a very curious person, just curious. And I'm really learning how to not try to define myself by a title. So you're right. I did provide you sort of the obituary description of myself. But that introduction sounds really great. I'm like, ooh, who is that lady she's introducing? Yeah. Because it doesn't necessarily coincide with who I am on an everyday basis. Mm-hmm. And not that is not true about those things, but right. How I became those things is a different story.
That's the real story.
Right.
That's the real me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I've been thinking a lot about my mama. She's no longer on the physical earth, but one thing she always told me when I was a little girl and even into my adulthood, she said, you've always just been, so she would call it inquisitive or quisitive. Since I was 2, I remember her saying that. So I think that's the best word to define me. And that's probably how I got myself in all the hot water that I've been getting myself into for the last 4 years. Well, really all my life. So I have a lot of questions about everything. And this path I'm on is a result of me being sort of brave enough to not just internalize my questions, but to start asking those questions out loud. So what I've been doing is asking a lot of questions out loud about everything, primarily my faith, because as you know, I was a pastor and my faith governed so much of my worldview. And so this journey has been about not just deconstructing religion, but deconstructing my worldview, because my worldview was an offspring of my religion. Mm-hmm. And once I started to deconstruct certain components of my faith, I had no choice but to also take a look at every other aspect of life, everything from my emotional and mental well-being to how this country runs, politics, just the socio-normative constructs that we've all kind of unconsciously aligned ourselves with without even thinking about them.
Exactly.
How I saw other people and how I felt about people groups. I mean, I had to deconstruct all of these norms. And so that's kind of who I am, Miss Karl, just a curious person who's decided to not just quietly introspect, but if there's any such thing, I'm outwardly introspecting. I think I just made that up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You mentioned your emotional well-being. Mm-hmm. Laura and I talk a lot about that on the Desert Sanctuary. Another preacher, Sarah Bessie, one time said, she said, the church didn't have room for my grief. And I write a lot of things like why the church normally doesn't heal our trauma. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, because you mentioned that you're working on yourself personally. Mental health, trauma, things like that are big deals.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The reason people come to church.
Yes.
But we don't always, well, I'll let you give your own opinion about that.
It's the reason so obviously I grew up in the church. I think most of us have that. But when I made a conscious adult decision to join the church, it was because of trauma. Now, in those days, nobody in my space was using the word trauma.
Right.
And in the Black community, I know you don't care if I bring up race, so it's okay. In the Black community, mental health, especially in those days, we're getting better now. Mental health and religion, just mental health and faith, mental health and church, they were considered an oxymoron. It was just, they just didn't go together. Mm-hmm. So nobody around me ever used the word trauma. Nobody around me ever talked about mental health. So, but I knew internally that something just didn't feel right with me. I just felt, I kind of heard the word depression a little bit in those days, but not a whole lot. I just knew I felt sad. I knew I felt unloved. I knew I felt broken inside, if that makes sense. So, and I always tell this story. I love my aunt to death. God rest her soul. But she called me when I caught her crying one night. I was just in a dark place mentally and almost suicidal, right? Mm-hmm. But I had a little bitty baby and I was just in an unhappy space with my marriage, with my life. And she said, baby girl, it's just, that's the Lord telling you it's time to come to him. I didn't know what that meant. But I did what she said. She told me to read the scripture, Psalm 139. I'll never forget. I read Psalm 139 and I said, oh, okay, I guess this is what's wrong. I guess I'm just separate from God. And God is using this to get my attention, because that's what I was told. So I went to church. Long story short, it was only in the last probably 7 years of my life that I realized that I never dealt with the trauma, never got dealt with. As a doctoral student, my dissertation studies are on looking at how what pastors' attitude is about mental health in the church. And so I've had to understand that all those years ago, it wasn't that I was a sinner and that God was beating me until I came to confession. It was that I had trauma. And I don't want to, it was trauma from early childhood stuff. We call it adverse child experiences, ACE. I had childhood trauma that nobody ever taught me to deal with. And we know now that trauma stays in the brain and it just lingers, right?
Yes.
I had attachment theory, not attachment theory. I had attachment issues, which attachment theory talks about how we connect to our caregivers at an early age. And I realized that I had attachment issues and how all of that was just affecting my mental health. I grew up around people who made it very clear to me, we're not supposed to talk about our pain. We're not supposed to be seen. We're not supposed to be heard. When I did try to express my feelings, oftentimes I was shut down and scorned for expressing my emotions. I was teased a lot because people felt like I was just too emotional. And so it was an unspoken lesson that you hide your emotions, you hide how you feel, and just going about your life. And so that's what I did. And so now this journey for me with deconstructing, it's not just about what I believe in terms of God. It's about deconstructing from this very toxic and dysfunctional way of living where we're supposed to just mask our emotions. Our emotions is what makes us human.
Right.
It's a human character trait.
Yes.
And I realized that nobody had taught me how to manage my emotions, which is why I created the Religious Trauma Recovery Program. Because a huge part of religious deconstruction is people are now going to have to learn how to deal with their feelings and their emotions, because in the church, we pray it away.
Right.
So we think.
Right.
For those of us in the Pentecostal church, we praise it away. Right. And so I knew that part of my deconstruction was, okay, I need to go back and I need to revisit this pain. Even the death of my mother and my father, because I was a minister at that time. I was told that with the Lord, suck it up, you're going to be okay. Right. I never even had a chance to grieve my mama specifically because I was really close to my mama, more so than my father. But I never had a chance to even grieve her death properly. And all that pain just sitting in my heart. And so, emotional wellness for me has been a huge part of my journey. And allowing myself to not feel like I'm crazy, right? Because I have certain emotions or because I feel a certain way today.
Right.
And that relieving myself of the pressure to have to always be perfect and have to always say it right and get it right. Because in leadership in church, that's what I was taught, that you're a leader and you need to fake it till you make it. You need to get it right.
Right.
And so because I was a leader in the church for so many years, and I was wearing this badge of honor that said, I got it right. Now I'm going to teach you how to get it right.
Right.
And I didn't realize how I was dishonoring myself all those years, how I was ignoring my inner child traumas. I was ignoring my mental health. And so now I'm having to go back and reclaim a lot of that stuff. And so, like you, I do a lot of writing. Not for me, it's courses more than books. Once I heal myself or once I get a revelation about something that I think will help somebody else, I turn around and try to package that into some type of program to show other people it's really okay.
Yeah.
If you have depression today, if you feel depressed, it's really okay if you feel unworthy for whatever reason, but let me show you where that probably came from. Because what I realized, y'all, was that all of that stuff I felt, it never came from me. It always came from something outside of me. It always came from another human being projecting their thoughts onto me and me accepting and adapting whatever they told me about myself. And so I created all of these beliefs around external sources, never getting a chance to even know myself authentically. I've talked a lot, so I'm gonna stop.
No, that's perfect. It's perfect. And I just have to say that I love this conversation already for so many reasons. One, because I really appreciate your bravery and authenticity to process things out loud, because I feel like that encourages or gives courage to other people who have maybe been afraid to do that. So first of all, I want to thank you for doing that. Second of all, I think the whole idea that we're talking about here of this trauma is so, so important. And I've been doing a lot of research and professional developments on trauma, especially in children, but it is amazing how that has brought a lot of things to the surface for me. So, thank you for sharing that part too. I wanted to go back really quick to one thing that you had said about Black culture and church culture. So can you, because when you were explaining things, like I think we both can relate to some of the church culture things that you had talked about, but how, for the part of me that does not know this, I would love to be educated. How does a Black culture play into those things that maybe, led to some trauma feelings? You talked a little bit about the attachment, which I completely agree with, but I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about Black culture and how that kind of added to.
So, how Black families typically, I'm just talking off the cuff here, like, for example, how Black families raise children.
Okay.
And it may be this way in white families too. I don't know, because I wasn't
right. Yeah. Sure.
So so growing up, and my mother I didn't get a lot of what we call spankings. I didn't get a lot of that, but I got a few. But just in families around me, what I would now call abuse, was normalized.
Gotcha.
In Black culture, like parents would get belts and whip their children. They would make you go to the woods and get your own switch, and bring it back to the parent and spank you with it, and then tell you to shut up when you're crying, even though the switch hurts. So that's huge, because when somebody is beating you and then turn around and tell you when they're done, I beat you, but I love you.
Right.
In your brain is now defining what love looks like. And so your brain makes you believe that love means I'm a bad person. The person who loves me has to punish my behavior through abuse. And that means that they love me. So you'd be surprised how you bring that into your relationships.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's really popular in Black church. Again, speaking and being able to verbalize what you feel. And I've been guilty of this with my children. I had to really apologize to my children, because we grew up with, again, children you need to be quiet.
Sure.
And if you said anything, they used to call it talking back.
Right.
Yeah.
So just the silencing that takes place. And if a child does try to express their thoughts, I mean, I remember seeing children being hit in the mouth. I mean, with a backhand, just hit in the mouth. Parents just cursing at their children. So what that does is tell a child, my thoughts, my feelings don't matter. I need to be quiet. Right? So that's huge. in terms of mental health, because now when you become an adult, you're going to have trouble with communication.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I just wrote that down. I was going to say that. You are so right.
You can't communicate, which means you're going to have really, I was getting ready to cuss. You're going to have really.
It's okay.
But you're going to have really like dysfunctional relationships, which when you think about 60% of our marriages end up in divorce, there's a reason for that. Because most of us don't know how to communicate with each other because we've been silenced so much.
Yep.
We're kind of looking for people to agree with us and not express their feelings. Another huge problem in the Black community, and I think this goes, I know this is an ancestral wound that needs to be healed in the Black community. I have this book that I love. It's called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy.
Very
She talks a lot about how Black people have inherited the trauma from our slave ancestors, right?
So interesting.
Which is where a lot of that abusive behavior comes from that we try to call discipline. It's really just us because we've been traumatized. And so out of slavery came the Black church experience. Now, I know a lot of Black Christians try to take church back to Ethiopia, and I get it. There was a church in Ethiopia, but I'm talking about church in America, right? Out of slavery, out of that trauma of slavery came this sort of church movement, because that was where Black people, that's where slaves went to for emotional release.
Sure.
Yeah.
Before there was physical buildings, of course, the slave masters made the slaves preach in their pre-built churches. But what the slave owners didn't always know is that slaves would actually go down into the woods and have their own church services, where there'd be a lot of hollering, a lot of screaming, a lot of shouting, a lot of dancing and clapping. They did that to release all of that pent up trauma and emotion. So in the modern Black family, and nobody really is going to tell you that this is where it's coming from, because I don't think they know yet. But in the modern Black family, we have inherited that nature. So this is why church is such a stronghold in the Black community, from my perspective. I think this is why a lot of Black people, I'm sort of a threat to a lot of Black churches, because if I say we don't need to be in church necessarily, I'm not saying don't go to church. I'm saying we don't need to be in church to feel a connection to the power of God. For a lot of people, that's gonna cause anxiety for them. Because why? Because we've learned to express ourselves in the church. We've learned to release a lot of our emotional trauma in the church.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So for Black families, church has been a staple in our community, because where else are we going to go to express? So what I heard all my life was pray about everything. And so because of that, y'all, we have not really developed strategies in Black communities for personal development. We've not developed solutions for problem solving, because all we were taught to just pray about everything and then to just leave it alone and just wait for God to answer for us. So in the Black communities, I think we have a lot of problems with people being able to create solutions for their life. And so they've just leaned into this sort of the spiritual activities, because what else are you going to do? If you haven't been taught how to problem solve, if you haven't been taught how to create solutions for a better life, you're just going to numb that pain with religious activity. So those are things that I consider to be religious trauma for the Black community. And there's more, but those are the things that I want to talk about today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for explaining that. I appreciate you doing that.
When, like you talk about in that situation, when so much is out of our control, then of course we say, well, God must be in control. Somebody's got to be in control, and they're going to make it all better. And then we bypass, like you're talking about in the church, and we ignore that child or that younger version of ourselves that was traumatized and never cared for properly. But that trauma doesn't go away.
It doesn't.
One author said it breaks out and misbehaves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we're triggered by our spouse or something, we're about to hit them in the mouth, you know. I've never done that, but so, you know, it comes out. Vanessa, we talked to you quite a while ago, but over the years, we've done 240 episodes of this show. And so people start telling us things, and words kind of emerge commonly. And two of the things that people talk about that I'd like you to address a little bit is this idea, which was discouraged by the church, of going inside and trusting ourselves. I was taught you can't trust yourself. But people that have grown, I would say grown beyond religion, or maybe grown in spite of religion or whatever, they tell me those two things over and over and over again. If they're doing well, people like Kyle Butler, you know, people, some of the people I would mention, you know, they say, this is what changed it. I started going inside and I learned to trust me. And can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it was an absolute new phenomenon for me, because my faith did not encourage that at all. And so when I came into, you know, quote unquote, the spiritual community, and I kept hearing this term, go within, and I was like, what the hell are they talking about? Because for me, that would mean something like prayer. And so I went on this journey to try to figure out and understand what that is. And so again, for me at least, going within myself means, again, analyzing and being very open and honest with my thoughts and what I think is true, what I believe is real for myself. I wrote a book and it's on Amazon. It's called What Book Should I Read? And I wrote that book because everyone asks me when I go on TikTok, that's where my biggest platform is right now. They always ask me, well, what book should I read to start my journey? And so I said to them, you know, I'm gonna write a book and give y'all my answer. And my answer is simply this: the book that we should read first is the one that's inside of us. We've ignored our own voice for all of our life. Right. We've ignored our own wisdom. And so for me, it's been about sitting still and listening to my own wisdom. You know, it's listening to my own thoughts and my own ideologies and defy, you know, I told my community, I said, well, I want you all to just start creating your own dictionary, like from scratch. Like, think of your own word and add a meaning to it. They're like, what? I want you to think of some words from scratch that nobody's ever said before and define that word, because that's what I do. So for me, it's about listening to that inner voice of wisdom that I think we all incarnated here with. Because to be honest, every other book we read, the Bible, any other sacred book, even your books, those are still your thoughts. Right. And I'm not saying that there's not space for us to share collectively in each other's thoughts, but we also need to make room to explore and investigate, examine our own thought systems, our own thought processes, our own beliefs, because that is how you start to identify and define yourself. And so for me, I had to strip away this identity that was created for me by other people. And I had to be willing to sit still, sit quiet, and turn inward. And for me, that meant looking at the repressed parts of myself, which is what we call shadow work, right? What part of me have I denied because somebody said that's not acceptable, right? What belief system have I pushed in the closet because somebody said, we don't believe that here, or you can't do that here, right? I'm wearing this pendant. I'm not sure if you all can see it. It's an ankh, okay? And it looks similar to the cross, but it's an ankh. And it dates back to early ancestral spirituality in Egypt, or Kemet, ancient Kemet. Okay. And it symbolizes eternal life. And it really debunks the Christian cross, right? And I'm bringing it up for a reason. And so when I studied the ankh, I was so enamored with the beauty of it, and it resonated so deeply. And for me to start wearing this thing out in public spoke to what was happening inside of my soul, because my soul told me things about life, about reality, about our universe that I hadn't heard anybody else say. And so for me, the beauty of going within is just tapping into that internal wisdom that you didn't get from a book, that nobody else will be able to tell you and debunk. And that's the beauty for me, is that on this journey, nobody can debunk what I say is true. I won't allow it.
Yeah.
It might not be your truth, but it's my internal subjective truth. And I think that's the power of going within oneself, is being able to say whether what I believe makes sense to you or not, whether what I feel is true for you or not, you can't debunk what my soul, my higher self.
Yeah, we have to believe. We have to believe each other's stories.
Yeah, and we got to learn how to be willing to do that, and we have to. I think you mentioned on your post one day about just listening to other stories, and that's why I have my podcast, Life After Church, because for the first time in my life, it's like, let me listen to other people without trying to correct them, or without trying to debunk what they say, or without even saying, I don't agree with that. Let me just listen, because how powerful would this world be? How quickly would our world heal, y'all, if we allowed everybody to express divinity through their own subjective self, even if divinity for them is, I don't believe in no divinity. You know, what if we all were allowed to just tell our authentic stories from the depths of our soul, free of judgment, right? Free of somebody trying to evangelize our thoughts, free of somebody trying to project their beliefs onto us, and we just let people be who they are. Like, I think the world would heal immediately. Yeah, because you can, don't you think?
Yeah, no, I agree.
People are. I think about the number of people who commit suicide every single day, who unalive themselves every single day, and folks may not realize this. Black men between the ages of 15 and 24 rank number one in suicide in this country, right? So it makes me ask myself the question, what's inside of people? How deep does that pain go that a person feels the only option is to take myself out of the world? Is there some truth that they were unable to live? Is there some thought they were unable to communicate because of fear of shame or guilt? What if we would release ourselves from having those judgmental thoughts about each other? God, the world would be such a better place immediately, is my thought.
Yeah.
One of the main, I think, needs of humanity is to feel connected.
Yes.
I can totally see you wanting to take yourself out of this world if you don't feel that there's a connection. And I agree wholeheartedly with what you said about healing this world, because when we allow stories without judgment or trying to fix or, evangelize or whatever, I mean, that's when true connection can happen. Like, we don't have to believe the same thing in order to connect.
My.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that's an area of growth for me, coming out of religion, because again, as a pastor, as an evangelist, they drive that point home that you're now, and we didn't say it this way in the church, but this is what we were really saying.
No, you never say it.
We didn't say it, but we said it. Now that I'm saved, I'm better than you. So let me teach you how to become like me.
Right.
You know, and so I look at my life now. You talked about going within, and one of the things I did when I was going within was I realized, you know what, Vanessa, and it was sincere, but I've coined this phrase that I call sincere ignorance, right? Because I had a lot of sincere ignorance that I felt like I really loved people in my ministry. I want everybody here, and but what I realized was, no, you didn't really love people. You had a loving presence, but you were loving people with the desired result of changing them.
Right. Yeah.
Transforming them. That's not love.
Yeah.
Love is when I can allow you to be whoever you are, even if you don't know who you are. And I can allow you to be that without me having to try to make any adjustments because something about you makes me uncomfortable.
Right.
And I'm still learning how to do that. And even with, and I know we started out talking about race. I'm not sure if you went live yet or not with the recording, but even as I try to navigate this whole racism in America journey, it's like I have a evil twin, because my evil twin is like, screw racism and the patriarchy in America. Screw all of y'all. Right. And then trying to reconcile that with the part of Vanessa that also needs to respect, not agree with, but respect those people who are operating in racism and misogyny. They can't go beyond their level of awareness. They can't go beyond their level of awareness. And if in their awareness, if in their consciousness, they feel right in being racist or supremacist, who am I to try to change them? Now, what I can do, which is what I am doing, is I can teach marginalized people who are on the receiving end of that how to prepare yourself so that their racism and misogyny does not destroy you.
Yeah.
And I think that for me and the work that I'm trying to do, for me, that's more effective than me trying to be a part of some march or some go down to City Hall and let's protest. That's not going to change racism. I think what's going to change racism, and I don't even know how I got on the racism conversation, but I think what's going to change racism and misogyny and patriarchy and all these things that we're dealing with is when every individual person can tap into, that's going within, can tap into their own worth, their own self-worth, their own self-love, their own state of well-being, then your issues over there don't affect what I'm doing in my personal life.
Yeah.
And so from the last time you and I talked to now, I'm in a different space, even with things like racism, because I'm working on Vanessa. And as long as I lack, again, self-honor and self-worth, and as long as I lack self-identity, what a racist or misogynist or religious ruler thinks of me is going to control my life, because I'm believing what they say about me, because I don't know who I am. When every person starts on the journey of self-discovery and knowledge of self, I have a tattoo right here that says know thyself. When all of us start to know thyself, then whatever energy other people are operating out of, it will have less and less and less and less power. And I realized that the reason why racism has torn Black people down so much is because we don't have enough Black leaders telling the people who they are. What we have done, in my humble opinion, is we've given into the narrative. And so you can't fight fire with fire. So we've given into the narrative that we are the minority. We've given into the narrative that we are, not treated fairly. And some of that is true. There are systemic laws in our country. However, child, an individual who has knowledge of self can rise above all of that.
Yeah.
And I don't see enough, in my humble opinion, enough people who are focusing on teaching us who we are. Because here's what I do know about the brain as the brain coach. If we keep spiraling in old beliefs, the brain is going to keep believing that.
Right.
And then so the individual person is not going to be able to live a different life. So what I'm doing now is saying, you know what? I no longer choose to believe the lies that I've learned in all of these institutions and these systems, because they're all working together to keep us as a society divided and disempowered.
Yeah.
So I do my own research, and I draw my own conclusions about myself, and I don't have to give as much credence to the noise of the crowd.
Would you say that what you're talking about right now is like lifelong work? And the reason I say that is because like I literally had an incident happen this past week that caused me to spiral back into my trauma. Right. So like I totally agree and love what you're saying. But it's like lifelong work, I guess, would you?
It is, because see, so here's this is what I tell people all the time in my community. It is lifelong work. And so don't beat yourself up for the spiral backwards, because I do it all the time. I told you now, the bio that you read, that's the polished version of me.
Sure. We all have that.
Who shows up even the interview that we're having right now is still a polished version of me.
Sure.
But here's the problem, not even a problem. Here's the truth. All right. The trauma, as much as we can manage it, and we can manage it, we can never heal it, because what has happened is trauma is actually a chemical response to an experience, right? So once the brain releases a chemical based upon an experience, the brain also takes a snapshot of that emotion, and it stores that chemical and that emotion in a cute little filing system in the brain. And so when we experience a similar situation, our brain goes into fight, flight, freeze, and it thinks it's happening to us again. So you know what it does? It goes back into the little filing system, and it pulls out that chemical, and it pulls out that emotion that is stored away for us neatly and nicely in a little storage box in the brain. And so at that moment, we lose kind of consciousness, and we go into reaction or unconscious mode, and we allow that old trauma to respond. That's what we call them, trauma responses.
Yeah.
It's normal. And I have those all the time. I have them online all the time. So as much as I try to teach this stuff in environmental settings, in real lifetime, no, we're going to have these experiences. And you know what I've learned to do, Laura, is I honor them. Whenever I get triggered, I teach this in my classes. Listen, when I get triggered, that's actually a part of healing, to be honest. Because first of all, it means that you're self-aware.
Right.
Because if you wasn't self-aware, you wouldn't even realize you're being triggered. For years, I was acting in trigger response and didn't know it. So the fact that you're mindful that you're being triggered, that's excellent. You should applaud yourself, because it means that you're self-aware. And when we get triggered, it's actually a superpower to show us, you know what, that emotion, that situation, it's still kind of lingering in the background. Is there another way for me to process that situation? Is there a way for me now to create a new response and tell my brain, from now on, brain, this is the response I would prefer to have when I feel this thing again, and then practice that response. Because what I do know is if we practice a response or behavior long enough, the brain will also code that as a new memory.
Yes.
And eventually you will give that new response. But for now, tell the trigger, thank you for showing up.
Yeah.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
When we, so the way some people describe it is when we're present with that, that unprocessed trauma, when we're present with it, then we can begin to integrate it into our lives.
Absolutely.
We'll still be triggered, but it's instead of a reaction, now there's a pause and then there's a response. And that can be integrated back in our life and make us stronger. I have one more question I want to get out before I can tell Laura and I both have tons of questions, tons of things to ask you now.
This is really striking a chord with me.
But let me set it up by telling a story. So there was this kid that was sitting on the curb. He's eating candy, and an older gentleman came up to him and said, you shouldn't be eating all that candy. And he said, "Mister, my grandpa lived to be 97 years old." And the guy said, "Eating candy?" And he said, "No, minding his own business." But the reason I say that is because for me, when I started going, I was a pastor for 20 years and I went home, then eventually we stopped going to church altogether. And what we intended to do, because we're both kind of introverts, is just mind our own business. But there's something in some of us, it's in you, says, I can't learn something without trying to share it with somebody else, right? Right. And so it's hard for us to mind our own business. But, and I'm just kind of saying that kind of flippantly. I think, teachers, sages, mentors, shaman, and all those people are necessary. But what I want to do is ask you, we all often ask people about their billboard and what they would put on their billboard if the whole world would see it. But I think I want to ask you, what would you tell to other people like us that can't mind their own business? What would you tell them about how to approach this evolution that we're on, this journey that we're on, trying to become more fully human, trying to understand what's inside of us? What would be your core piece of advice? We didn't give you any advance warning of any of these questions. We wanted it to be organic. But what would you say to people out there as we're a lot of us, maybe millions of us, are trying to embark on this new journey to become more whole, more human, to solve those major problems? What would you say to them?
I wish I had a deep philosophical answer, and maybe I will when I come back and think about it later. But you know what works for me though is, and I said this in the beginning, I think. For me, there is a magic in talking out loud. Like, I will go for a walk outside, or I'll sit here in my office and I have full-fledged conversations with the world out loud. And there's nobody here but me when I do this. Because I imagine a world where if all of us, again, could sit in the same space and be able to say whatever we want to say, no matter how crazy or dysfunctional it might sound, that in all of that conversation, we would be able to craft a world that is full of peace and love and harmony. So I think for people like us, because that resonated deeply, I can't mind my business. I can't shut up. And I know that there are some people who wish I would shut the hell up. But then I get these emails. And every now and then I'll say, okay, Vanessa, just go run your business and shut up. Every blue moon, it don't happen often. And then I get emails from people from all around this world, y'all. Pastors, from pastors to atheists, who say, you saved my life. I mean, I know y'all get that too. They'll say, I watched your video. I watched your live stream. I found you on YouTube. I listened to your podcast. I found you on TikTok, and I was getting ready to take my life. I was getting ready to go hurt somebody else. So I think there is a super magical power when people like us can come before the world and bring our flaws and our imperfections and our passion and share that with the whole world. Even if we don't even, like today, I didn't know what you were going to ask me. I didn't even know how to prepare. But what I did say before getting on this call was, I'm going to come and bring my soul to this conversation, because that's all I have. I don't have anything else to give. And so I think for people on this path, if you could ever find your soul, because it's in there, it's inside of you. And finding your soul means moving away all the BS that we have. That's why I don't watch a lot of TV. I don't listen to a lot of the headline stories. I don't get caught up in all the chatter. Because all of that is what has created the condensed version of Vanessa. And if every person could just find their soul, could find that version of them that has always existed, because I think, and this is the mystic in me, I think that every one of us are eternal beings who never end. And I think we've always been, and I think we'll always be. And so if we can all just find our soul and get and find the bravery to speak from our soul, even if it is mixed with our traumas, damn it.
Right.
Even if it is mixed with our fears and our nervousness, our anxiety, no matter what it's mixed with, if we can just find that part of ourselves. And that's what I'm giving you all today. And that's what I give every single day that I wake up out of my bed. Yeah. I'm bringing my soul mixed with all of my trauma. But my prayer is that people will see through all of my trauma, because it comes out through all of my whatever else is in there. At the end of the day, I just hope that one person can see my soul. And if that happens at least once a day, my living is not in vain. And that's what I would put on my billboard.
Yeah, good.
Find your soul and live from that place.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I have loved everything that you've shared today, and it resonates so deeply with me just because of the trauma work that I do, the trauma that I've had, right? And the work that I continue to do on me. And I love that you have literally given our listeners permission to do that. And not that we need permission, but sometimes we do need permission.
Sometimes we do.
Right?
Sometimes we do.
We've been told for a long time that we cannot do that. So sometimes we need permission to say that we can do that. So how can people get a hold of you? Tell us about some of your courses. Where can they find them? Just all the things.
Sure. I do have a new website. It's called lifeafterchurch.org. So all the links to everything else I do is on that website, lifeafterchurch.org. They can find me on TikTok if they're on TikTok, Life After Church, Facebook, Life After Church, or Vanessa R Brooks. Everything's Life After Church. If you just type in Life After Church, you'll find me somewhere.
Okay. And they can find your courses.
All my courses are linked. They sure are. Awesome. Tomorrow, as a matter of fact, I'm teaching a 3-week Reiki course tomorrow, which I'm really, really excited about. All the things that we couldn't do in the church is what I do now. All the things that were demonized and looked down upon and shunned. That's what Life After Church is about.
Awesome.
Vanessa R Brooks, ladies and gentlemen. Yes. One of these days we're going to have our applause meter right here, and it's going to go, yay. But as of now, we don't. We're deeply appreciative for you to come on and especially to be vulnerable,
right?
To not have any questions up front, and just let this kind of be a soul conversation.
Right.
And we believe that people's stories are sacred, and when we listen to them, when we believe them, then as you mentioned, that's going to change the world. Those kind of conversations.
Yeah.
But for those out there listening, we thank you for tuning in today, and we hope you keep joining in the conversation, being a part of that. We believe part of that is taking a good analysis of organized religion, and that's what our book is about. Is we hope that people will do that assessment, and whether they stay in or come out, we want that journey to be full of honest evaluation and introspection and things that Vanessa talked about today. So thank you for tuning in. And as always, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary. We hope you find who you are as you embark on your own journey.
For all of us here at the Desert Sanctuary, be who you are, be where you are, and be at peace.